the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all of this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 301. This is an upper level class, guys. How current is the current thing? I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator, Lauren Brooks, and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, to jump back into the history of women's studies for a final look at its totally organic, not at all manipulated march through the institutions of academia. Hope you guys studied for this.
Do you promise us that this is the final one?
Yes, this is the final exam, and it's gonna be a doozy, cause we've been getting gaslighted over what's going on today in academia, as if it's what's going on today in academia is not going on today in academia. Well, I'm here to tell you a few things about academia. This is gonna be a fun show. Sorry guys if I squeak at you or sound bad. I'm having an Ohio asthma day. I mean a bad asthma day. A thing. Yeah. Like I said to Lauren before we started, at least I'm not in Pennsylvania, because then I'd be having a bad asthma day, and I'd be in the state Joe Biden came from. So.
Thank God you're not in New York, because the less said about that, the better.
Yeah, I don't know that it would be. Well, I think I've pointed out before that the EPA was created to address environmental stupid doings in Ohio. Like that's a thing. So there you go. But yeah. I can't breathe. Yeah, and I'm probably going to be sniffing at you. Sorry. But with all that, before we do anything else, we got to do what we got to do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. So now let's dive back into history, where we'll learn, as we often do, that everything old is new again. So we left off last week in this last couple of paragraphs of this. This is the center column here up on the left. There's another column to the left of that I'm not showing on the screen. Where
it's the fifth column.
Yeah, wow. The fifth column. That's true. But we found out that to get women's studies, they consider it a mandate for women's studies, in the universities and in the upper echelons of academia, that the establishment was funding them, right? Because we remember we did the earlier part of the article discover that from the beginning they were establishment funded. And from the beginning, establishment media promoted them. From the beginning, they were networking and conferencing and organizing in order to spread this to every university in the country. And then we learned at the end of the show last week that their next target was the public school system, where they sponsored a conference that would deal with grades kindergarten through 12 in order to extend feminist ideology to every education level and setting. So that's the thing. And various public schools by 1992 already were boasting gender equity officials. So administrators whose job it was to promote this idea of gender equity rather than gender equality. And remember, when we talk to feminists and they talk about the difference between equity and equality, right? Equality is when you start out and there aren't any laws hindering anyone's progress. Nobody is stopped from pursuing happiness by any laws that are not there to just protect other people from being assaulted, wrongdoing, and stuff like that. But gender equity is where you say, well, these people have less of a chance of meeting their goals, so we're going to take away from these other people's chance to meet their goals in order to even things out.
Yeah, equality is communism pretending not to be communism. Equity is communism not even pretending not to be communism.
Well, communism isn't equality. I would say communism is equity.
No, yeah, exactly. Equality is what communists call communism before they're able to have moved the Overton window to what is actually communism. But
because,
arguably,
equality is a free market.
Well, yeah, equality of opportunity is what is supposed to happen under capitalism, and communists know this, and so they use that as the stopgap between capitalism and communism. But arguably, even equality of opportunity is not even possible. You should as an individual, you should be able to advance your opportunities by your own means.
That's why I don't even talk about equality of opportunity, because it's bullshit. Equality is equal treatment under the law. Equality is when the law doesn't discriminate. It doesn't take action against one group of people, even under the guise of helping another group of people, just on the basis of their immutable characteristics, their demographic, right? That is equality. Everything else that people call equality is equity.
Yeah, you can't have equality and freedom at the same time.
Actually, you can.
Well, you can.
Yeah, I'm gonna be a real stickler about this. Like, the less the government does, the less authority does, the less a bigger hand does to interfere with the situation, the more likely you are to have equality. People have warped the idea of equality into something that it's not. It is not evening the playing field. It is not altering the situation in order to make things identical for people. It is not giving people things to make up for disadvantage or perceived disadvantage, or taking things away to make up for advantage or perceived advantage. It is the least possible interference in the situation so that nobody is more interfered with than anybody else. That is equality. Anything else is not equality.
It's brought about through freedom.
Yes.
If you want the closest approximation we can get to equality, it only comes through freedom. You cannot bring freedom about through equality as a first principle. And none of this has anything to do with equity. Nothing can exist in the presence of equity. Equity is just communism.
Yeah. Equity is the opposite of equality. It is an excuse for inequality. And in fact, equity is basically taking a situation where one demographic is unhappy and blaming the other demographic's happiness, and therefore taking action against the happy demographic on behalf of the unhappy demographic. So there you go. But yeah, so various public schools, even by 1992, and again, 1992, I had just graduated high school. Right, that was a long time ago. 1992, we just came out of the Reagan and Bush era, Bush Sr. era, and Bill Clinton became president. It was the first president who was elected despite having information brought out about him that would have previously been so scandalous that it would have prevented him from continuing to run for office. And it's also like most of Gen X was old enough to vote in that election. The overwhelming majority, I think, of Gen X was old enough to vote in that election. So there were a few people. I think my younger brother is still considered Gen X. He was born a couple years after me, or my younger brother. I'm sorry, I'm the older sister. You could tell I'm low on oxygen tonight. But in any case, so there were still a few that were not yet old enough to vote. But yeah. And I'm not even talking about the Lewinsky scandal at that point. I don't think that. I mean, that probably would have also the Jennifer Flowers thing would have kept him from running just a few elections earlier. But the pot smoking thing, that would have done it, and it didn't. Right? I mean, I don't think a president before Clinton actually was popular campaigning on MTV before 92. Like in 1992, MTV was only 10 years old.
Oh my God.
MTV was a fourth grader. Ha ha ha. So, yeah, Paula Jones wouldn't have either. The Paula Jones thing would have been like, he wouldn't have been able to run with that. So he ran with all kind of scandals and won, right? I think he's the first president that was that blue law type scandal ridden, and still, got elected during the 20th century at least. Maybe earlier there were rumors that got spread around about presidents and people were like, no due process. Let's figure this out. But
at the time we were of course all listening to Nevermind by Nirvana and 10 by Pearl Jam. We were all getting into the grunge craze of just not giving a shit about anything and being all nihilistic about everything. And you might say the Democrat regime of Bill Clinton came about as a solution to that, but it didn't. It came about as a result of that massive abyss in the market of shits given.
And the feminist establishment got behind him really hard, like really got behind him. And the reason they got behind him so hard was because they knew that he would not tank Joe Biden's Violence Against Women Act that was being worked on. Because Bush Sr. did. He wasn't going to even address it, because we already had a law. The Family Violence Prevention Services and Prevention and Services Act of 1984. That law did everything that we were told in the early 90s that we needed the Violence Against Women Act for. Right? That was already in place for 10 years, and that was getting renewed periodically because it was part of the greater criminal statutes of the federal government in the United States, and all they really had to do was address increases in funding for it every time that it came up. Just like they do with everything else. They don't repeal other laws, right? They just increase funding. But they treated it like it didn't exist. So in 1992, we were hearing about how there's just nothing being done about domestic violence in the United States, and it's just this ridiculous situation where a guy can just get away with beating his partner, and nobody will do anything about it, and nobody talked about the other end of it, right? The majority of domestic violence being initiated by women. They only talked about it as a male perpetrated behavior, and they talked about it as if it was completely unaddressed in law and policy. even though that every state by that time had state law governing it and had had state law governing it for most of their existence as states. And then also the federal government had federal law governing it, and there was a law passed as recently as 1984 at that point, that was really all encompassing. Shelters had been established and everything, and so there was no valid reason for this promotion. And Republicans had, at the very least, they were defending the Family Victims Family Victims Services and Prevention Act. It might be Prevention and Services, and I got it reversed. But they were defending that at the very least because it was a Republican gig. They passed that. That was a Reagan thing, and so they may have been defending it just on that basis. But the Violence Against Women Act was also a lot of government overreach that didn't have anything to do with preventing violence. And we'll get into the history of how that happened another time. But that's what's going on as this is taking place that we're reading. This is the time period we are in. VAWA hasn't been passed yet. It's just being discussed. It's being promoted. It isn't even on the table in Congress yet. In fact, Biden is probably still, crossing his T's and dotting his I's. He's just quite
Is before they attached his earlobes back to his head, or
to his head, yeah.
While he was still saying shit like, "We already have a nigga mayor. We don't need a nigga president."
Oh,
he was repeating that. He was repeating that, but he didn't.
You
really
should have
a
seen the
problem
look on
saying
his
it.
face though when Clarence Thomas was testifying in about his circumstances. When he was this is after that, but the appointment of Clarence Thomas revealed a bit about Joe Biden. There's this GIF I have, not on the computer I'm using right now, unfortunately, so I don't know if I can. It's too much trouble to move it over and show you guys, but there's this moment during the testimony where the camera pans to Biden, and you can just see him narrowing his eyes and squeezing his pen, staring at this man he hates so much, being given a chance to address the allegations against him and confront the lies that were told about him. That really he was not
contemplating some kind of bloodbath.
Yeah. he was definitely not a happy camper in that moment. So that's the stuff that is the political background for all of this. It had been, let's see, 7 years since I had the time I had pig shit thrown in my face by pro-abortion advocates at a pro-life rally. So there you go. That was so disgusting.
And now you're already being overrun by wild hogs that was somehow introduced as an invasive species. Can we even call them that? We can't call them invasive species. They are newcomer pigs. That's what's going on. They're undocumented wild hogs. Shit like that, right?
Yeah. Oh, jeez, Pete. Newcomer. There was a show that was on at that time actually, that could be a reference to as well. So, but yeah, the American Association of University Women at that point was even offering an action guide on gender equity in the schools. So they had plans, they had organization, they had communications, right? They were networking on this. They were doing conferences on this. So here, that's where we're at. Miriam Chamberlain notes with joy that Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation is bankrolling women's studies programs at the high school level. 1992 is when that started. Along with Ford, the Dodge Foundation is funding a veteran women's studies... Excuse me, sorry. A parachick... That... I've literally never seen that word. Anyway, that's probably... That is probably for the better. Anyway, a parrot chick or a apparat chick, I don't know.
Apparatchik. Yeah, apparatchik. I've only heard that term just I've only heard it just recently, and I have to thank Twitter for that. But I don't exactly know what the term means necessarily.
Is it related to apparatus? Is it like some Greek version of apparatus?
Not sure.
Member of the Communist Party. That's what it means in politics. Someone who works for a government or political party and who always obeys orders, in American English, but it's a communist. So, funding veteran women's studies communist who works for a government or political party and always obeys orders. I can't say I've never heard this word because I read this article like 30 years ago, so but I don't remember that. Who once taught at Harvard and the University of Denver and is now Associate Director of the Center for Research on Women at Wellesley. So she's been around. She's a university hoe. Academia hoe. McIntosh is founder and co-director of the National SEED, SEED capitals, all caps, project on inclusive curriculum. SEED stands for Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. Gosh, all we need is inclusion, and we can have diversity, inclusion, and equity. Gee, that's so new, guys.
Someone ought to track the history of all the fucking acronyms they've been using for communism over the years.
They're not teaching this in schools. They haven't been teaching this in schools since 1992.
It's not a real thing.
It's not a real thing. What are you guys talking about? It's crazy conspiracy. Since 1992.
Well, it's last century or something.
Yeah, totally. Yes. So, she outlined her plans to bring the gospel of women's studies. Sorry, that's as high as I can sing. And anybody who's heard me sing knows that. To high school girls in a 1990 lecture in Brookline, Massachusetts, that was captured on video. When parents, anxious about feminist propagandizing in grade school, began to ask what was going on, however, Superintendent Patricia Ruane embargoed requests for the tape and forced concerned parents to file requests through the Freedom of Information Act. Not got anything to hide there, have ya? So, this is a communist propagandizer who did a lecture in Brookline, Massachusetts about how to propagandize high school girls, and when parents asked to see the lecture, they hid it. You can't see it. You can't know about this. You don't have the right to know what's being taught to your children in schools.
As I go fill out some paperwork, bitch.
Yeah, that's all brand new. Never been done before. It's just suddenly started happening in the current year plus 7.
It's I get the difference between progressive and conservative, and I use those words sparingly because they're both euphemisms. But progress necessarily always involves change.
Right.
They're always trying to change things just for the sake of changing things, not because it will make society better, but because they've already arrived at the predetermined conclusion that if we change the way things work, everything will be better. It doesn't matter if everything was working just fine. We need to change it anyway. And so it almost stands to reason that they change the name of communism constantly, over and over again, to just a different acronym, a different initialism for each generation. For every couple of years, they change it to a different acronym that pops out. That makes people think, well, this isn't the thing we were doing 2 years ago. It's the thing we're doing now. And they don't even care because it's always about change. It sort of explains why when you ask people about the gender thing, that they don't particularly care that you can change men to women and women to men, but you can't change black to white and white to black again, because the thing they've always been centrally interested in is changing the gender dynamic, or the biological sex dynamic, into something else, which goes to show you that the focus of their change has never been racial. It's never been class based. It's never been sexual orientation based, as in gay, straight, whatever, or that's always been adjacent to it. They've always been interested in changing male and female, which goes to show you, whenever you press these people on if someone wants to claim they're a woman, if a man wants to claim he's a woman, they'll just go, oh yeah, totally, definitely, that makes perfect sense. And then when you ask them, so can someone who's white change themselves into black, they go, no, that's not a spectrum. Even though it literally is a spectrum, race literally is a spectrum, and not just between 2 points, but between the various points of Europe and Africa and Asia. They just go, no, that's not a spectrum. You could have various different great grandparents of various different races, but that doesn't change anything. You're always either white or non-white. But gender, on the other hand, which is just this bullshit made up word they use for biological sex. Oh yeah, that can be changed at all times. And because that's what they want to change. And this is what I'm saying. Stop getting distracted by all this racial nonsense and all this gay nonsense and all this trans nonsense. They've always been interested in change for the sake of change. And the central pillar of the change they want to exact is between men and women. They want to change men to women and women to men, and that's always been the case. And you have to wonder, where exactly was the pivotal point in this? Was it perhaps at some point when a duplicitous but somewhat charismatic leader led the charge by saying, change? How many people have forgotten this by now? Do you remember a certain president who led the charge by saying hope and change?
And you weren't allowed to challenge it because he
was black.
Yeah, you're racist if you ask what hope and change means. So the lady that we are talking about here, McIntosh, somebody pointed out she's the abominable woman who came up with the idea of white privilege, and that is true. And she had a thing she wrote prior to when this article came out, called "Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack," and it I want to see where it was originally published. See if I can find that out. Peace and Freedom magazine, which So something to understand about communists is when they name something, they name it to sound like the opposite of what it really is, because they want to trick you into accepting it. So this is published. This was published by the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom out of Pennsylvania, and you can actually get a copy of it, I think, free now. They like hand this stuff out like candy, but it's essentially a diatribe on how when you're born as a white person, she believes that you're born with a set of advantages automatically just because you are white that nobody else in the world has except white people. And then at the same time, because you don't, you try to protect those privileges as a population, and because you don't necessarily recognize that they are privileges and not inalienable rights, that you teach your kids racism as they are growing up, and they learn racism, racist attitudes and racist behaviors. So essentially, for instance, the expectation that people will base their interactions with each other on merit and good intentions, goodwill, and things like that. The expectation that people will not be malicious and do malicious things, on which law and policy and social norms are based. She attacks that over and over again in a variety of ways in her writing, and she has done that historically. She's essentially stereotyping non-white people as naturally unethical and naturally lazy and naturally not as smart, and then valuing ethical behavior, valuing ingenuity and diligence and other non-lazy qualities, and valuing intelligence as a form of prejudice. So she's racist, because as none of what she's written is true. Like, intelligence is not racial, and there may be cultural things that can influence it. There may be life circumstances that can influence, your development of it and so on. But it's not a guarantee that because somebody is from one race or another that they're going to be smarter or dumber than other people who are of a different race. There's no guarantees based on race. Like, nothing is guaranteed. We had a movie making fun of that that came out in the 80s, where the main character used tanning pills to achieve essentially blackface. And of course he busts all the stereotypes at his university, and then when it's revealed that he's white, everybody starts, oh, no wonder. But the movie existed. It was called Soul Man. Yes, Richard Gere, that's correct. And the movie existed to ridicule the stereotyping and there were all these stereotypes in the movie that were just thrown in there and lambasted and so on. And I think people never really got what that was about. So they instead, it's kind of been memory hold. But yeah.
That was with Tim Curry from Saturday Night Live, right?
That was what?
That was with the black guy's name, Tim Curry, right? The comedian.
I think so. But
there was a Mark Curry who was white. Tim Curry's the guy. Tim Curry's
Mark Curry. Tim Curry's English.
Yeah, he was in the Let's Do Time Warp thing, the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yes, he was in.
Mark Curry. Mark Curry had his own sitcom at some point.
My favorite Tim Curry movie is Clue.
Hanging with Mr.
It's Tim Meadows that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, Tim Meadows. Okay, now you're right. Tim Meadows is the right guy. I'm like, that doesn't. Yeah, but yeah, no. Tim Curry. My favorite Tim Curry movie has to be Clue. He was fabulous.
Which
in
version?
Clue. All of them. Every single one. I will watch every. Yeah. Yeah, I will go through and watch every ending.
No one's done a movie like that since. They did several different endings that were shown in several different theaters.
Yeah, and then people came out
so ahead of its time.
They're like, this person did it. No, this person did it. That's not what they showed in my theater. But yeah, it was something that you could do back in the 80s. You could lampoon bad behavior back in the 80s, and people would recognize that you were making fun of the bad behavior. Today, people are like, oh my god, they're promoting this behavior. Yeah, that's why everybody's laughing at it, right? That's why everybody's making fun of it, right? Like, that's why it's the butt of the joke, because you're promoting it. Yeah, no.
Nowadays, there's no such thing as behavior. There's just bad races and good races, and bad genders and good genders.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, thanks, Macintosh. But it does kind of trace back to her, because all the arguments that doing bad things becomes okay if you have historical disadvantage kind of trace back to this concept of privilege. So, in her quest for gender-fair and gender-explicit curricula, Macintosh attacks something she calls vertical thinking, which, to me, the progressive stack would sound like vertical thinking. But let's see what this is about. The vertical system, she says, represents exact thinking or decisiveness, or mastery of something, or being able to make an argument. Asking a child to answer simple mathematical problems correctly is an example of vertical thinking, in addition to being pedagogically crazy. So, essentially, the question of whether 2 + 2 is 4 goes back at least beyond 1992. That example didn't, I mean, obviously it came out of the 1984, the book 1984, not the year, but they were already trying to justify the government, the party, the state, the powers that be, the authorities, demanding that you ignore objective reality in favor of this postmodern idea that it might not be real, it might not be true, it might be insane for people to have to be expected to understand observable reality.
Seems like a reimagining of the difference between literal and lateral thinking. Like, literal thinking is things like mathematics, as in what is 2 + 2, and then there's this idea of riddles, like things like a pear tree has 80 branches and 20 sub branches per branch and 5 sub branches per branch. How many plums does it produce? And you're supposed to figure out that it's none, because pear trees don't produce plums.
Right.
And there's all sorts of examples of lateral thinking puzzles like that. And that's not a good example, because so many of them are it's difficult to figure out the answer to, because it's just a case of what am I thinking? You have to hone in on a particular part of the description to figure out what's going on. And in many of such examples, you can think of a way out of the answer, but it's not the right answer because you weren't thinking what the questioner was thinking. And though it works in humorous lateral puzzles, that's just for the sake of parlor games and sort of tricks like that. It's not supposed to work in mathematics. Some things are supposed to be objective, and they very much include mathematics. And
if you don't want the building you're in to collapse, mathematics needs to be objective.
Yeah, and these things were always supposed to be separated, but yeah, we're looking at the early 90s at the seeds that developed the poison ivy that has now grown into our general culture at this point.
Yeah.
Where 2 plus 2 doesn't even equal 4 anymore. You're supposed to think of that laterally as well. Well, it could equal 4, but when you think that 2.5 plus 2.5, which you could round down to 2 in each case, can equal 5, even though you might think it would equal 4.
Yeah, the weirdest argument I got is if people have different words for 2, that means 2 plus 2 no longer equals 4 because they have a different word for 4 as well.
Oh my God.
And I had to explain to somebody that the numbers and the addition are not about the words, they're about the quantity. And I've had arguments with people about this that are really bizarre, like, so let's take a story problem, all right? You're in a disaster. You're in a part of the country that is below sea level. The water has risen above sea level everywhere around you, and it's about to spill over the topography that sort of protects the little valley that you're in. And there's one way out through this cavernous area that is already filled with water, and water is already coming and it's rising around everybody. And so you're all going to have oxygen tanks and oxygen masks and so on. And there's 20 of you ready, and there's another like 18 people coming in. So you need to know how many oxygen tanks you need. Is it still okay for math to be subjective at that point? Or do you want to make sure everybody gets an oxygen tank? And that usually gets me blocked. Like, who do you leave out? Who doesn't get the oxygen tank if you decide math is subjective and you come up with a different number than the actual total number of people, the quantity of people who need oxygen tanks? Real simple. But unfortunately, people actually get upset if you prove to them that there are times when objective reality is objective and you have to deal with it as objective reality and not pretend with thought exercises that you can negate it with words. You can't.
The argument is often there's no such thing as objective, and even in the deepest excesses of even mathematics, you could say that even 2 plus 2 plus 4 isn't entirely provable because all we have is a finite number of results, and any finite number of results can't produce an infinitely objective result. But this is why we differentiate mathematics from science, because mathematics is the region in which we can develop the closest possible thing we have to objective, and science is a layer below that, where we can say things about the natural world that can be determined by what has been determined by mathematics, and below science there is everything else. And it's at some point you can't split hairs anymore. At some point you have to say, well, this is why when you walk off of a roof, you fall towards the ground and you fucking die. It's because we've determined that every time this has ever happened, the subject in question has succumbed to gravity and been punched to death by gravity. Like, yeah, I know it's happened 100% of the times we've seen it happen so far, and I guess there is a possibility, given the possibility of quantum tunneling, that at some point, given infinite time, someone might walk off a building and miraculously fly. But until then, like, we can say that 2 + 2 does equal 4, and that you're not going to miraculously fly if you walk off the top of a building. But this is what we're being moved towards, and not for the sake of people flying from walking off buildings, but for the sake of women and minorities getting jobs at Boeing, even though they have no fucking idea how to put a plane together. Yeah.
Yep. So, the vertical part of the psyche, says Macintosh, is triggered by words such as excellence, accomplishment, success, achievement. They represent a hidden ethos that has made a few white males dangerous to themselves and to the rest of us, especially in a nuclear age. So it's dangerous to do things right. It's dangerous to make sure the bridge doesn't fall and everybody has enough oxygen tanks to get out of the valley. That's her conclusion. The vertical model is also a societal structure. The military, the government, the academy, the church are almost always hierarchical. And again, we're looking at qualifications here. Experience and performance, knowledge, character, wisdom. Right? Those are the things that get you moved up in a hierarchical structure. So those are the things that are valued so that the people under you can find you to be reliable in circumstances where they need guidance, where they need support, where they don't know what to do, and maybe are trying to decide whether or not to continue in that career, right? Where they need to know what the structure of the organization is, where they need to know what the rules are, or where they need to be held accountable for their decisions. You want somebody that's incompetent doing all of that? I'll tell you what, you go work in a convenience store for a few years and then come back and tell me how you feel about that.
And here I thought it was just about being the biggest lobster.
The rock lobster.
Yes.
Good grief.
So what you're saying is lobsters can put airplanes together.
And we should order our entire society around this idea.
Yes.
Macintosh wants to implement a curriculum that will entail lateral thinking. So now I want you guys to understand, when we're talking about this, because this is basically the take 2 + 2 is 4 out of math in schools discussion that they're talking about right here. In 1992, that discussion was being had in public. Right? That discussion, they were comfortable having that discussion in public, at least to the degree that it was detectable by organizations that for publications like this that would write about it. Yes, when people start asking questions, they draw back, they cover their asses, they hide, they gaslight, and so on, like they're doing today.
Well, look at what this is. Look at what she's saying. It's basically what she's saying is, if you want to boil it down, when you're presented with a situation where you have to choose between one of two options, maybe you should think about choosing the wrong one.
Yeah. And by 1992, this was so entrenched in academia that they were comfortable admitting it in public. By 1992, the thing that we are being told, oh no, that's not happening in schools today. There's nothing like that going on in schools today. That hasn't been instituted. What are you talking about? It's just an idea. You're scared of an idea. That was already so entrenched in the university system and already becoming so entrenched in the public school system that they were comfortable advocating for it in public. They were comfortable bragging about it. They were comfortable treating it as the norm. That is terrifying. Like, all this time, people have ignored it all this time, and people think it jumped out of them out of the closet at them and went boo like the boogeyman during the last decade or so. Oh, everything was normal until, 2010, 2013, 2014. No, it was not. This has been going on for a long time. This is old shit. This shit is so old that it was already old in the 90s.
And that's old.
Yeah.
30 freaking years ago. My God.
Yeah, that's older than, it's a longer time than I've been a mom.
The 90s was 2 years ago. You can't convince me otherwise.
Oh, I don't want to go back to the 90s. I was a dumb shit still in the 90s.
I do.
I'll take the gas prices. That's
oh yeah,
all
okay. The gas prices from the 90s, I'll take. Actually, I would rather have the gas prices from the 80s.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I would rather be a dumb shit and have nothing particularly bad going on in the world.
But it already was. Yeah. That's the thing. It had been going on since before. This shit has been worming its way into academia since before I was born. The few boomers that are in our audience might remember the start and implementation of women's studies as a class in the 60s. Like that was a new thing in the 60s.
Doesn't seem that long ago. Yeah.
Oh, I have a couple of super chats or not super chats, but super chows I'm gonna read. I'll start with Meredith G's because Meredith G gave us a big super chow. She gave us $100 and then she gave us $5 and said, "Honey for the badgers. Spring has sprung in the south. Actually, I've been dealing with the pollen over a month, but the nose assault is exhausting, so I will probably be asleep an hour into the show." Yeah, I it's not pollen that's getting me because stuff has peaked up and gone back to sleep twice now. Like the crocuses have been like, "Is it time yet? Oh, sorry. Is it time yet? Oh, shit." Like twice now, and it's cold again, so it's not them. But I like I said, I'm in Ohio, and we all know what has been going on in Ohio of late. So
spring happens at roughly walking speed.
Yeah.
You could walk northwards through any given country, and you could notice the various different plants sprouting as you walk northwards.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's this time. I don't think it's seasonal at all. It's just my respiratory system is just currently a train wreck. Pun intended. The one good man gave us $5 and said, "Only just started listening to this show, so may have missed this, but why isn't it scarier that the U.S. president is in favor of denying due legal process to half the population based on the myth of the rule of thumb law?" Oh, it couldn't get any scarier than it is. I've been talking about that since the beginning. This is like one of the first really big contentious person who was sort of my friend but not close stops talking to me forever kind of arguments that I got into in college was debating the validity of the Violence Against Women Act. And I was sure that it wouldn't pass because it was such a stupid jump in law and policy. And I thought that if it does pass, it's not gonna make it through the test of the courts. And I mean, like, I was super wrong because it's still federal law. But I can tell you how terrifying it is because I've watched several men go through ordeals that were a result of this law being passed. And it's horrifying. Like, there are men dying because of this law. There are men committing suicide because of this law. And there are men whose lives are being wrecked. And there are children whose fathers are being taken away from them, and their trajectory in life is being wrecked because of this law. Because due process is being taken away, and people who did nothing wrong are being treated as if they did.
And there's no one in any party who's even considering repealing this law. This is among the worst things about not just democracy, but government in general. They never even consider repealing laws. They just think of more laws we're going to put on top of what's already happened.
Well, and that's how I know that Republicans' opposition to it back in 92 and 93 wasn't because they disapproved of what was in the law. It was because they were being protectionist. They were protecting the legacy of Reagan's DV law, not protesting the wrongness of Biden's anti-due process law. Because if they were protesting the Biden wrongness, they never would have let this law stand. So there you go. Yes, it is terrifying. And actually, if you look up a story, I can provide you basically with the experience of reading my response to one of the cases that I was involved in. I was actually a witness in that case, although I never had to go testify because of the behavior of the false accuser in that case. But the title is 7 Years in Hell, and it is on A Voice for Men, and I had a pen name when I first started commenting on A Voice for Men, so I wrote as Gloria Sass. All right, so there's a story behind Gloria Sass. Gloria Sass was obviously a crank name for, back in the day when you put fake names in the register in class so that the substitute teacher would. We did this all the time because we had a boy in our class whose last name was Hunt, and his first name was Michael, and you dare not call him Mike because he would kick your ass. And it was a family name. The Michael was a family name. Hunt obviously was a family name. So there was already a crank name in our class, just by virtue of that. And I think I would have made it the kid's middle name, but his mom was probably really innocent and didn't think about that. But in any case, we used
her
to
loss
put
is our gain.
Yeah. We used to put, in the name register, if the sub wasn't there on time and the students were there before the sub, the name register would have Ben Dover and Aria kidding me or Aria shitting me, because there was a way to make shitting me look German, and we had a lot of German kids, German heritage kids in our school, so yeah, we had some German names and Polish names that made all kinds of weird spelling for other people look normal. We had, let's see. Oh, we had a bunch of them. Glorious Ass was one of them. So that's where I got that name originally. But I used to work at a pharmacy as a shift supervisor. And the pharmacy uniform was a polo shirt. There was a grocery store down the street that had a gas station that, you get a reward card, which is like taking a survey, basically, passively every time you use it. And your payment for the survey is discounts on the groceries. And the survey helps them decide what to put on their shelves. So if you buy the same thing over and over again, they're more likely to have it there for you. So it's not a bad thing. You can consider it a privacy violation if you were not told what it was for, but they're pretty open about this is what we're using this for. You're guiding our marketing. This is helping us sell you shit. And then they also use it to try to manipulate the customer they give you coupons for things that they want you to buy. But you don't have to do that. You can buy what you want, and you still get the points for spending your money there, and then you get discount on gas. So I always got fuel at this gas station. It was in between my home and my workplace. And so I stopped there on my way home, and like I said, my uniform shirt was the same color as their uniform shirts. Very important thing to know. So I stop, and, at the gas station, there's usually several pump stations, and each one will have 2 pumps, and from the direction you're pulling in, one of them is going to be in front of the other one. And there was already a car at the front one, so I pulled into the second one, and I start getting fuel. And as I'm fueling up, and I was on empty in a big vehicle, so I'm fueling up for a while. This the person at the front pump pulls away, so it's empty. And like right after, this lady and her husband pull up, right? So when she pulls up, there's nobody in front of me, just me, pumping gas at the second pump. And rather than just, oh, well, this one's empty, I'll go to it, she gets annoyed, and she whips around me. And you can tell, like, when somebody drives like that in a parking lot area, they're mad about something. Well, I thought, well, I'm not getting involved in that, right? I just kept doing what I was doing. And then she gets mad and yells at me about not pulling up and stopping at the first pump when the other one was open, And I kind of explained myself. I'm like, well, there was somebody there when I pulled up. And so she's embarrassed, so she starts yelling at me about pumping gas on the job. And it took me a minute, because, I had just clocked out and driven away from work before I did this. I just got done with a shift and was on my way home. So I'm obviously not at work. Well, and I realized the name of the store that I work at isn't on the sleeve that is on the side that she's standing on yelling at me. And she's going off, I can tell you're pumping on the job. This is you're in your work shirt and blah, blah, blah. Which I could have just clocked out of work at that grocery store, too, if I'd have worked there. But I didn't. So I was like, so you're objecting to my shirt? She's like, yeah. She was mad. She was going off about it and everything. So to understand this, you need to know that I hate bras. I fucking hate normal bras. They're uncomfortable. I feel like somebody tied me up. So I don't wear those. I had, at the time, a whole bunch of those, sport bras that you see a lot of women, they go jogging in those and runner tights, or now they wear, those yoga pants and shit, and just have their bare midriff hanging out, and it's a top, and it's thick enough, it's thicker than a t-shirt. It's thicker like a polo shirt is, where it gives you the amount of coverage. It gives you more coverage than a bathing suit. And so it's not really considered an undergarment, but it does function the same way as a bra. It does what a bra is supposed to do. So I just took my shirt off and threw it in the window. And then she got really mad. She really lost her shit. She went off, yelled at me a bunch more, and then demanded she was going to go report me to my manager. She wanted to know my name. So I told her, Gloria, sass, And she goes running off, stomping off into the store to report me, presumably to the manager. And the whole time, this woman's poor husband, is just like, he's sitting there. He put his head down. You know, he didn't want any part of this situation. He didn't want to, exacerbate it, make it worse or anything. But I kind of glanced over.
You could say something along the lines of, "Glorious ass is a pun, my darling."
Yeah,
He's
no.
obviously taking the piss. Can you not?
He did nothing. He was just like, I'm just invisible here. I'm not going to draw her attention. I don't want to be the target of the next tirade. I felt really bad for him. And I'm pretty sure he was probably so henpecked that he probably had scar tissue from it. And but when I did that, I took my shirt off and threw it in the car. He just kind of like ducks down, and you can see him. The expression on his face was just like, "Oh my god!" Like it can.
He probably thought y'all were about to fight.
Yeah.
He probably thought you two were about to fight. You just took your shirt off.
That would have not been a good thing, because at that point, let's see, I would have been in my 30s. And she was elderly. Like, I would put her early elderly, but she was elderly. Like, she probably has, at that point, she probably already could get an AARP membership, at least. Possibly was eligible for Social Security. But in any case, like, and the really bad thing was, like, there were other people there. So I'm like, all right. But it was summer, and lots of gals were running around like that, so I wasn't too embarrassed. But the weirdest part, I come back, I shopped at that store a lot because it was convenient on my way to and from work. So, like, sometimes I would stop and get my lunch on my way to work. Sometimes I would stop and get things for home on the way home, and so on, right? So I go in the middle of the day one day, and I go past the area where they have there's a seasonal aisle, and it's wider than the other aisles because a lot of times they'll put a line of things down the middle of it, and there's just a mess there of somebody has brought a bunch of stuff to set up there and then dropped it off and then just left. And you can tell that it's been sitting there for a while, nobody did anything with it, and nobody knows why. And so the manager is just like, the person that's supposed to be dealing with that aisle during that shift is there, and she's talking to the manager, and he's going off at her and everything, and what is this mess doing here? Why isn't this taken care of? What's going on with it? What are you going to do about it? And blah blah blah. And she's like, I just clocked in. I don't know anything. I don't know what's going on. I don't know how this got here. I didn't put it here. And pretty soon they get to the conclusion that nobody knows how that stuff got put there, why it was just left like that, and why nobody has done anything with it. And finally they start talking about it. Well, it must have been glorious ass. So I became a legend in the grocery store. They didn't know who I was, but they did know that some lady came in and probably went nuclear at management over an employee there named Gloria Sass, who didn't exist.
This is the issue with the Karen thing. And I don't mean our very own Karen. I mean the meme of the Karen. It's been a thing for a long time. People like to deflect the Karen thing as though it's something localized to white women, although it's localized to a socio-economic class of women. No, the problem of women being Karens has been a problem for fucking centuries, and it's really not divisible into any other kind of women. It's women who are determined to complain to whosoever to whom they can complain.
Yeah.
It's always been a problem. It's a bloody good thing you didn't talk to her about the R you were putting in your tars. That's another one of
we're not getting into
Hannah's thing.
That's the ire in my pores.
It takes 10 years for you to finally know all of Hannah's anecdotes.
Oh my God, no. We're not going over all the anecdotes, but that one I haven't told for a while. So Gloria Sass is my handle, but if you can't find it under Gloria Sass, look under Hannah Wallen and see. But that's my author name. That's like the link to my author name has Gloria Sass. My profile on the site was named Gloria Sass when I first started. It's Gloria, S-A-S-S. And of course it's obviously part of the pun is the sass. But and part of the pun is the ass. So there you go. But that story is a horrible story. It's not funny. Although...
But it's much more interesting than this fucking article we're talking about.
The end of the story gets funny. I didn't tell that part, I don't think, because it hadn't happened yet when I read the article. But after the end of the story, when there was no longer a reason they couldn't be in contact with each other, and she's just trying to navigate having to co-parent. She sends him an email about something, and she's bitching about something, and I can't remember what she was mad about. But it was just, the format of the letter was bitch, bitch, whine, whine, cajole, blame, anger, and then just in the middle of it, for no reason, with no place for it, tomato. Literally, the word tomato. Then bitch, bitch, whine, cajole, blame, threaten, angry, love, and then her name. And I'm just like, he showed me this, and he's like, should I be worried? And I'm going, well, she can't do anything. But, and that was it. Like, she was reduced to sounding like a complete psychopathic moron.
New York, concrete jungle with free tomatoes. I don't even know what the original lyric is. That's just always what I hear.
Yeah, but in any case, so it's when you read the story, just bear in mind, because it gets bad and it will be enraging, and it'll make you sick, thinking about what this guy went through. But it gets better. And things are better in his situation now. And this all happened starting in 2000, I want to say 2006. So by the time Gamergate started, she was in tomato mode. And he was walking away from the wreck, of what had happened up to that point. So there you go. But yeah, Macintosh wants to implement a curriculum that will entail lateral thinking. This is one of the transforming notions of women's studies, which holds that learning should be seen not as mastery, but as our connection with the world as we grow and develop as bodies in the body of the world. Like, could you have come up with a more stupid and complicated way of saying that? Good fucking grief. The object is not to win or excel, but to be in a decent relationship to the invisible elements of the universe.
And the only way to win is not to play the game.
So when you go into the classroom, do you have to speak friend and enter? Like, this is fantasy shit.
Do you have to know it in Elven? Melon.
Yeah. Paul Grafton gave us $5 and said, visit Camping Sensei since I spelled with an A for your outdoor gear. Oh, that's an ad. Well, we'll take that. Thank you for the $5. Invisible elements of the universe. So, I guess the tough part here is it sounds like she's talking about gaining an understanding of the world around you, including your social environment, right? She sounds like she's talking about gaining a realistic understanding, taking a realistic view, being able to navigate the social environment, and having the tools to make the legal environment, make the social environment able to be navigated, right? Open to navigation. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is she's talking about substituting beliefs about the social environment and the legal environment for recognition of real world existence, like real world problems, real world characteristics, things that are true.
And this doesn't need to be taught to most people. Most people have an intuitive understanding of this.
Yeah.
Including men. I know people like to stereotype men as being autistic, but they're not. The only people who need to be taught social cues are people who are not even autistic, but mildly autistic. People who are only so slightly autistic that they are able to learn things. Because people who are severely autistic can't learn things. That's their problem. But people who are mildly autistic perhaps need to be taught certain social cues about things, and this is being told to them as though they're not going to learn these things just through ordinary osmosis, like they ordinarily are. There's no effort given to teach narcissists to learn about things that aren't learned through osmosis, like science and mathematics, and like the empirically determined things, like how gravity works, like how physics works, and stuff like this. No effort is ever given to pointing out to narcissists, never mind women, that there are certain things that can be objectively measured, and that's not just physics and mathematics. There are even certain social phenomena that can be measured in certain objective ways that I dare say autistics understand better than narcissists understand. There are certain things that narcissists just cannot get to grips with unless they're taught it, and even then they still don't get to grips with it because they are deeply narcissistic. They don't understand anything objective. They would rather replace it all with their own feelings. Like there's some people that don't understand feelings because they're more interested in facts. We colloquially call them autistic. And there are some people that don't understand facts because they're more interested in feelings. We call them, well, we should call them narcissists, but we don't. We call them normal people, even though they're not normal.
We mostly call them women.
Yeah.
Although there are narcissistic men too, but they're outnumbered by narcissistic women on a grand scale. So, the really rough thing about it is we're dealing with a political narcissism, like a party of narcissism. And,
politically normalized narcissism.
And the types of objective fact that exist aren't limited to if a rock is hard and you bang it against your head, there will be pain and potential injury, or possible pain and potential injury from this. It's, if you lie over and over again, and people know that you lied over and over again, especially about things that are important to them. Like, it's one thing to say, yes, I'm fine over and over again when maybe you're a little bit not fine, but you're going to be okay, and they don't need to do anything for you, and you don't need them to do anything for you. Like, that kind of lying, people can accept that, right? But if your lie is, no, I didn't sleep with that person, I was loyal to you, and in fact, actually you did, and they find out, then you lose people's trust, right? That's a reality. It's an objective reality. People will judge your character based on your actions and how those actions affect other people, and whether those actions are considered ethical, whether they're socially acceptable as ethical behavior. That is not negotiable. It's not something that you can be like, I have a right to engage in that behavior. Well, yes, maybe you have a right to make that decision for yourself, but it doesn't mean that people don't have the right to judge you for it. Right? And it doesn't mean that people have a right, or people don't have a right to withhold their trust or withhold their openness to you because of it. Right? People do have a right to defend themselves against things that they perceive to be threats of injury or threats of psychological harm and things like that, by choosing not to associate with you or choosing not to make themselves vulnerable to you. And those are objective facts. And unfortunately, the big problem that narcissists have is they don't recognize those as objective facts. They consider them to be negotiable, and they consider themselves to be in a better position in the negotiations based on their beliefs about their own value and their interests in their own position. They feel more entitled. So they feel entitled to mistreat people and then be treated as if they did not. So that's the biggest problem I have with narcissists. And unfortunately, like I said, we have a political party of narcissists that is running our education system. And so they feel entitled to brainwash your kids, to mistreat them, to mistreat you, to mistreat their greater community, and be treated as though they did not.
Not just our education system, but our health system.
Yep, our health system, our economic system, our due process system.
It's particularly because of the systems that are mainly populated by women. And that's namely our education system, because most teachers are female, and mainly our health system because most nurses are female, and increasingly more and more doctors are female. And it certainly doesn't stop there.
Well, that's not an accident, by the way.
Given the DEI problem, more and more industries are being forcibly populated by women and minorities, but that's the thin end of the wedge. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and in terms of the education system, it was by design. Like, women essentially Me Too'd their way into dominance of the education system. Not by accusing male teachers of harassing female teachers, but by demonizing male teachers as potential threats to female students. And that has resulted in a shortage of male teachers. There's a lot of male administrators, but not so many male teachers. And then, of course, the women are complaining that it's discrimination, that there are not enough female administrators, that most of the women in the system are in teaching positions. Well, it's because most of the teaching positions are filled by women. So you're always going to outnumber women in teaching positions. Are always going to vastly outnumber women in administrative positions because there are more teachers than there are administrators.
God help you if you tried to become a teacher as a male. Yeah, there's a countdown to the time you get accused of a certain kind of crime. You know what I mean?
they just start treating you from the start like you're a threat. Like the women, and they'll also exploit you as the heavy, like the individual that does discipline that that women just don't have the balls for, and I'll just put it that way. And it's funny because my mom worked at a school for a while where one of the teachers was a nun, and she wouldn't paddle the students, which is funny because of the stereotype of nuns at Catholic schools and how abusive they were. But she used to tell the story of how one of her friends, one of her colleagues at work, was a male teacher, had opened his door to his classroom. This is back when men could teach class with their door closed without getting paranoid about it. To the knock by this nun, and she wanted him to paddle her student, but that's not what she said. She asked him if he had a whacker, and she's like, I don't know how to answer that. It's not every day that you have a nun knocking on your door asking if you have a whacker. So there's the innocence of the 60s. The late 60s. But in any case, back to the article.
My whacker is Jesus's whacker.
Yes. So she wants lateral thinking to be presented as central to education and made part of the job description. McIntosh speaks of 100 years of change that will be required to usher in her lateral millennium. So 100 years got real short, guys. Ideological fundamentalists on a roll. The impresarios of women's studies have ignored opposition from serious critics of the movement, such as Camille Paglia and philosopher Christina Hoff Sommers.
Boo! Boo these women!
we know.
It's impressive that they were already within the public eye by the early 90s.
When VAWA came out as a lobbying, well, actually, it was before when VAWA came out as a bill, clear back in '87. So VAWA wasn't really. There was no discussion of a federal law in 1987. There were other things going on. 1987 was when Mary P. Koss published her initial quote-unquote study, the survey that set off the panic over an epidemic of date rape on university campuses. By interpreting women's answers to mean that they were raped, even though 73% of the women she called rape victims didn't think that they were rape victims. They didn't agree with her assessment of their experiences, right? And there were some other professors besides Sommers who had debunked that study, and Sommers had the same objections to that study as those guys. They were professors, and they were canceled. The men were canceled for saying this. But Sommers actually has been writing about that particular area of study of academia for quite some time. So a lot of people got to know her through Gamergate as Based Mom. But before she was Based Mom, she did a lot of debunking of false feminist narratives. And the only problem I have with her is that when she quoted the work of men who may have debunked those narratives before her, she didn't always give credit. And this is something that, this is a female problem. Women accuse men of doing this all the time. But I think a lot of times women think that the ideas they have in the moment are their own original ideas, even if they read the idea somewhere, or it's being commonly discussed and they're repeating it. And then the other thing that happens is women assume if they know something, everybody knows it. So it's one of two things may be possible. One is that she may have internalized it, thinking, oh yeah, this was my idea. And the other one is she may have thought, well, everybody knows that this guy is the one who said these things. But it's important to make an effort to credit people that educated you in a particular area. It doesn't take away from the fact that she is an individual who goes against the grain of feminism very, very strongly, and that she has made those debunking facts more mainstream than they ever would have been if they'd been buried by university feminists. So yeah, when people attribute that kind of behavior to like one individual or another, that's actually a gendered behavior that women accuse men of all the time, but women do it more. And I think women do it, they're worse about it. So, but let's see. So women's studies have ignored opposition from serious critics of the movement, who see women's studies as obeying a perverse version of Gresham's law, in which quack scholarship such as Mackintosh's drives out legitimate scholarship. Such critics believe that the academic sisterhood is peddling prophecy, regeneration, and coercion, not pedagogy. They find it noteworthy that women's studies has struck up alliances with creeds such as Stalinism at UC Santa Cruz, Bettina, I don't know this woman, Aptheker, true-believing daughter of communist stalwart Herbert Aptheker, and I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong or something, and worshipful biographer of Angela Davis is the head of the Women's Studies program, while Professor Davis serves as icon in residence. Davis is kind of the connection between neo-Marxism, also known as cultural Marxism, and feminism, by the way. I'm one of these days I'm going to go into that, because in the United States, cultural Marxism, I think I did go into it in a previous show, and YouTube might have memory hold it, but cultural Marxism and feminism sort of made their way through the institutions and evolved their way through the institutions separately. They didn't start out as one thing, in that the same people that were involved in one of them were not involved in the other one until Davis. And she just kind of like, she's sort of the crux of their connection. So, but it goes on, the feminism is not concerned about such criticism. Mary Ellen Capek of the National Council for Research on Women sees the outcry. I wonder if there's a National Council for research on men.
I'm going to say no.
Yeah, probably not. Sees the outcry over political correctness as and that's what wokeism was called back in the day, political correctness. And I know that I wrote about this before, so we may have to do another episode on it and start talking about it here and then switch over to just other platforms to avoid having the whole thing get memory hold. But as a backlash against the success of the knowledge base transformation that's actually gone on. So when they propagandize you, it's not that you've been lied to. It's not that you're programmed. Right? It's the knowledge base transformation. Kapek knows all about PC because she is the director of an NCRW project called Beyond Politically Correct, Reclaiming Diversity in the Curriculum, to which Ford contributed $100,000 in 1991. $100,000 in 1991 would have paid for all 4 years at a private university for a bachelor's degree.
Easy.
And that's with you being in residence on campus, funding your books, and paying for your meals and incidentals ahead of time on campus. Like, all-inclusive package. You probably would have had money left over. Now, I don't know about the elite schools, but I do know what private school cost. And we're talking a university, private university.
4 years from now, $100,000 will pay for a hospital, depending on who gets voted in next.
Well, you actually can run up more than $100,000 from a hospital visit now, depending on what's going on and what tests they run on you and what treatment they do while you're there. Especially if your visit entails surgery. Even if they send you home. Depending on what doctor they like. Especially if the surgery requires somebody like a gastroenterologist or a neurologist or 2 doctors because the problem spans 2 different systems. A hospital visit can get fucking expensive.
If you're a legal citizen, that is.
Yeah, if you're legal. And that's even if you have insurance. Right? If you don't have insurance, then there's a whole different story. Though there is an interesting thing in the U.S. If you don't have insurance and your income is really low, there's a process by which the hospital simply eats your costs. And it is enshrined in law. So when people say that poor people aren't getting medical treatment because they're poor in the United States, that is incorrect.
That's bullshit.
Yeah, middle class people are more at risk, actually, because their income is too high to qualify for that program, and their insurance is so expensive and has such high deductibles and co-pays and stuff that they can't afford to use it. So they can't go to the hospital because they've already spent too much on the guarantee that they could go to the hospital, but then they would still have to pay after they visit the hospital. On the other hand, in the United States, if your insurance company decides that you shouldn't have a particular treatment, you can still get it. You just have to pay out of pocket. You have the option, even if the insurance company says no.
You would think socialists would have a problem with this, but apparently they have more of a problem with Ahmed wandering across the southern border and somehow not having all the benefits of a socialized healthcare system. Is so weird, isn't it?
Well, the interesting thing is, when you enact a full socialized healthcare system, they start using killing people as a method of expense management.
Yeah.
Like, everybody always says, that's a slippery slope argument. That's never gonna happen. Tell it to the maid.
Mm-hmm.
For the sake of our YouTube overlords, we're not talking about that thing we're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah.
That thing that's killing shitloads of Americans. No, we're talking about MAID. specifically talking about that thing that's going on in Canada.
Canadian thing.
And nothing else. Don't you worry.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about that thing that's openly going on in Canada. Yeah. It's not the only place it's going on. Like there have been stories here about the withholding of treatment as a means of managing costs by letting people die who could have actually recovered in the United States for about half my life. So it's not even specific to any particular illness or injury. It's just a thing that's been going on for a very long time.
It's just this mad coincidence that so many people are getting so many illnesses in the last 3 years. Don't worry about it. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah. So, yep. KPEC knows all about PC because she is the director of NCRW project called Beyond Politically Correct, Reclaiming Diversity in the Curriculum, to which Ford contributed $100,000 in 1991. The project, says a Ford report, seeks to support mainstreaming programs. You can tell this is a reprint from somewhere else because they have all the dashes in from where it was copied from another magazine, where the paragraph changed. And I'm betting they used a program to put the imagery around the pictures and everything called PageMaker that did not have a spell checker to alert them that they had unnecessary hyphens. But by providing in-depth assessment of, quote, PC attacks. Having fomented the revolution, the foundation now gives money to stamp out the counter-revolution. They seek to assess you. So this thing that's been happening recently, where we're getting told that the institutions of the establishment are investigating the non-woke counterculture, that's not new either. It's just that previously you heard about organizations like the Ford Foundation and various banks and stuff funding private investigations into the anti-PC counterculture. You'd see like the Southern Poverty Law Center involved. You'd see, various organizations like the National Organization for Women making a big deal about it, but you didn't necessarily see three-letter government agencies getting involved like they are today. The reason that that's happening now, I think, is because the people who are at those agencies today came up through an education system that had been dominated by this shit already for 20 years. And so the administrators are Gen Xers and baby boomers. And the Gen Xers never had any time in an education system that didn't have this stuff going on in it, right? That didn't have indoctrination of the students with wokeness. And then you have the next generation after the Gen Xers, the millennials, who came up through an education system in which wokeness was so normalized that it was treated as like almost the oxygen of the system, and anybody that went against it was weird and scary and threatening. So that's why we now have federal agencies. Guarding their gains and spreading the revolution at home, the subsidized radicals of women's studies have also set sail to colonize the rest of the world and transform it in their own image with what they call, quote, global reach. On every front, Chamberlain says the strategy is further. Peggy McIntosh's seed program has already set up shop in four foreign countries. And that was 92, so it's everywhere now. Chamberlain and Bernstein say that the Ford Foundation, with its network of field officers, is in a strategic position to play an important role in the international sphere and has already subsidized a number of programs. Through such initiatives, foreign societies too will be enlightened. They too will learn the delights of horizontal thought, the dangers of phallocentric discourse, and the notion that exact thinking is, quote, male, and therefore malign. All the pseudo-scholarship and dreary agate-prop of feminist Gnosticism will be theirs. Godless trinkets and subtitled versions of We're Talking Vulva, title of a recent video by the National Women's Studies Association, will no doubt follow, along with Urdu and Swahili translations of the world, according to Paula Rothenberg. We've come a long way, baby, and they're not finished yet.
They literally just called it colonizing.
Yep.
I mean, I know we skipped over that 2 paragraphs ago, but they literally called it colonizing. Cut to 30 years later, and they're calling it decolonizing.
Yeah.
Are you getting it yet, folks? It's only a set amount of time before they call the thing they're doing the opposite of the thing they're doing, as though we're just going to not realize that they're doing a thing and trying to pretend they're not doing that thing by saying they're doing the opposite of that thing they're doing. And sorry, I have to look through this fucking paragraph again because there was so much in that. They admitted so much in these last. Sorry, talk amongst yourselves. I'm fascinated.
Well, the thing that really led me to want to share this article with everybody and discuss this is the fact that, today, and I mean, I guess the older you get, the more this is going to happen to you. You see something start, when you're young. It starts happening, or it becomes public, where it's been happening in secret and now everybody knows about it. You see political dissent and debate taking place around it and so on. And it goes on. You think, oh, this is going to be settled in a few years. And it goes on and on and on. And 30 years later, like, it's gone through waves of being a little underground, a little less public, a little less in everybody's face. And then back to these ideas sort of gain a little popularity, a little mainstream acceptance, and suddenly this effort is back in everybody's face again. And the debate rages that, well, this thing that you're saying is going on, this conspiracy that you're accusing these people of, it's not real. It's not happening. It's just made up. Nobody's doing that. You're so paranoid. Right? And that has happened. I have seen that discussion, you're so paranoid, this is not what's going on, 3 times now. So about every 10 years, they sort of pull back a little bit, and then they sort of reintroduce it all, and it's a little further than it was the last time. And people object to it being a little further than it was the last time. And then they have that "you're so paranoid" attack that they use to shut up the critics. This is not a big deal. This is about politeness. This is about treating people fairly. This is about decolonization. This is about kindness and equality. Well, equity. Not equality, because equality isn't equal now. And it gets old. So I wanted people to see this is 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, they were comfortable talking about this shit in public. 30 years ago, it was already permeating the entire school system. From kindergarten through graduating with a full doctorate, right? 30 years ago, there were already people saying, hey, this is a problem. And 30 years ago, there was already a response from the feminist movement, from the institutions that are promoting this, almost like an immune response to any resistance to it being imposed on the population. None of that is new. None of that is in any way accidental. It's not organic. It's systematic, institutionalized repression of society's natural evolution, a natural social evolution. And that's where we are today. We are looking at the latest thing, not the current thing, the latest incarnation of the eternal thing. So did I give you enough time, Mike?
They're calling it Gnosticism. You can probably still see it in that shot we're still looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've repeated this a couple of times, and not just because I'm copying James Lindsay. God bless him. I don't agree with James Lindsay on everything, but he has pushed this Gnosticism thing several times, and I've followed in his lead because I think he's right, and not because he's doing it from a Christian centric point of view, and neither am I. Gnosticism was originally a reaction to Christianity. It's been described as various things over the years, but it's the general idea that that which is established religiously, particularly the Christian God, is not just wrong, but the opposite of right. It's that God does exist, but he is evil, and therefore you must take the Christian faith and invert it. That God is evil, and therefore everything Christians say is not just wrong, but the opposite of right. And so everything that Christians say is the devil is that which you must embrace, which is, I mean, just as open-ended as everything the Christians say. More so, actually, because the idea of Christian evil is more open-ended than the idea of Christian good. It's that anything that appears to be the right thing to do should be the wrong thing to do. Anything that appears to be the wrong thing to do should be the right thing to do. And all of this is framed through what you can see in the same paragraph there as phallocentric, which just means anything involving the penis. And which goes to show it's a lot more specific than what Dr. Lindsay might call Gnostic. It's specifically anything that favors human beings that are attached to those things we call phalluses.
Yeah.
It's not just that God is male. It's not just that we should therefore worship an incorporeal female spirit. It's that we should worship a corporeal female spirit, an ideology that is female shaped, or I guess vagina shaped, although it's difficult to pin down exactly what the fuck the shape of a vagina is. But that's kind of the point. The fact that the female does not have a shape.
They use the term yonic, which I think is appropriate because if you think of it from the perspective of the English language, which it's not an English word, but it sounds like yawn, and I may be mispronouncing it, but that always makes me think of a gaping hole.
Yeah, it's not a recent idea that the feminine is represented by a hole, or that the feminine is represented by the absence that is filled with the presence that is that is male. That's kind of the idea of yin and yang. it's not even a monotheistic thing. It dates all the way back to Hinduism, and the yin and yang that became Buddhism. That the feminine is the vast infinite void that is filled by the measurable shapely presence that is the masculine, and it all makes sense. That it's not misogynistic and it's not misandric. It's perfectly feasible to say that the duality and indeed the harmony of the void and the presence that fills the void is represented by the feminine and the masculine, and that all makes sense. It's what has led so many religions for all these times, that has allowed human beings to thrive on this earth for so long. But what we're looking at right here is an ideology that favors the endless, infinite void over anything that might fill the void, anything with a shape that might fill the void. We're looking at a shapeless, indefinable thing. Much like what I was saying earlier, nobody knows what shape the vagina is because it is a hole, and yeah, we're the theme of this whole our response to this article is trying to push back on this shapeless idea that anything can be anything. That it doesn't matter. It's just what women and their advocates say is whatever reality is, and that's the nature of a whole. There is no shape, there is no accent, there is no anything. There is only whatever we who are in charge of the whole say exists. Which doesn't matter because all that exists is the whole. And it's becoming increasingly difficult in this rant to even say what that even means, because that's the nature of the whole. Nothing exists. The only thing that anyone should pay attention to is the abyss in which one stares. And it doesn't even matter when the abyss stares back, because by that time it's too late. You've already stared into the abyss. And the abyss is far more powerful than the firmament that might stare into it. I've lost everything I was saying. I think I might have said something spiritually important just now, but I've forgotten what it was.
Well, among other things, I mean, you pretty much laid out, the way that feminism is fundamentally about hating men. Right? Because it's fundamentally about hating structure. And structure is essentially a masculine thing. Women will try to pretend that they provide men with structure, but that's not true. It's the other way around. And women often resent the structure that men provide. And so they come out with this shit. So... And I guess the only other thing I will say is that if you want to know what happens when you put something into the void, ask Princess Butthurt of Femitopia. It causes earthquakes. In any case, that is the end of our article. We do have another Rumble rant. NovaFan 21 gave us $2 and said it's frustrating when people were pro-second wave feminists now act surprised when they say it's suddenly a problem. No, there were signs, but the propaganda machine called the criticism far right. And yeah, they've been doing that all my life. There is no such thing as left wing and right wing to these people. There is center, right wing, and far right. There is no left. Because everything that we would call left wing is reasonable to them. So, So yeah, they're pretty much unable to assess themselves or the situation. Remember that vagina sculpture hole dug into the ground in South America? Yes, Richard Beer. Oh my God. Well, technically every bottomless pit is a vagina sculpture, right? Let's see if we got any more super chats. Nope. So that is it. We are done. So thanks everybody for sticking out this. I know it's a dry history lesson, and I know I did a lot of talking about things that are not necessarily part of the article, but sort of trying to provide context. But I also, we've got listeners of all ages from, I've been contacted by some listeners who are still in high school, all the way up to listeners who have great-grandchildren. And, my grandkid is great, but he's not a great-grandkid. He's a grandkid. So, people older than me. So there's, I'm trying to provide context for the younger set and remind the older set, because they were here for a lot of this stuff. And it does sort of need to be done, because we are being talked to online today and on television and news media and so on, as though the last 10 years is somehow isolated from the rest of history. And it's not. It is a continuation of the events that began taking place many years ago. And so there you go. But thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to my two co-hosts for sticking out the 3-episode long sausage in which we discussed this article. We're not stopping with the history lessons. Next week we are going to go back to the current year minus 800. I think it's.
We're going back to the future.
Yes. We're actually going back to the 13th century. So
the longest Women's History Month ever.
Yeah, the longest Women's History Month ever. Next week, we're going to talk about the evolution of voting rights. We do have to talk about one thing that technically isn't about voting rights in order to understand the evolution of voting rights. Because, and we're not talking about the worldwide evolution of voting rights, we're talking about the almost worldwide evolution of voting rights in areas touched by, show us on the globe where Great Britain touched you, by British common law, because that's actually a much bigger portion of the world than people think. And so, yeah, that'll be a fun journey as well, and it'll probably take us out of Women's History Month, and we will probably have to continue talking about it next month a little bit, because there's a lot. So we'll probably have 2 shows or more come out of that. But it's important to understand it, because the myth that voting rights are somehow completely divorced from the obligation that men face to back up their national unity and their rights as human beings with their own blood. That myth needs to die, and we're gonna kill it. We're gonna sacrifice it on the bloody altar of academia. So if you want to watch the bloodbath, come back next week and listen. I'm going to be going over. I'm writing stuff. This isn't something where I can just pick an article. I'm having to do almost like a research report on this. So it's going to be raw. It's not going to be like video form, and it's not going to look like an article very much either. I mean, it is kinda, but in any case, we'll go through it, and we'll have as much fun as we can with it, and we'll do what feminists have been telling us to do all along. We'll educate ourselves.
Nice.
So
if we told you just to read this article, you wouldn't have had any fun, folks.
Yeah.
Consider how much fun you've had from us presenting this article with to you with our commentary.
You wouldn't have gotten the context either.
Notice how much fun we've turned this fucking nightmare into. That's what we're here for, folks.
Yep, that is true. That is what we're here for. And if you want to contribute to keeping us here, just a reminder, check out Feed the Badger. I will plug feedthebadger.com one more time because we do need you as much as you need us, maybe more. So, thanks again, and good night, everybody.
Good night, y'all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.